Congressman, always great to see you. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm currently in Israel at an international security symposium, and I spent a significant portion of the day with Speaker Ohana. That's the Speaker of the Knesset. Obviously, the big topics are hostages, American aid, and Iran.
Well, let's start with the top one then. Give us the lay of the land on where. I know President Trump had said that last week was the deadline for all hostages to be out, but then gave Prime Minister Netanyahu sort of the green light to do what he has to do. Where do things stand?
Well, as we know, the last living American hostage has been released, and we're thankful for that. There still are several hostages that are being held by these Hamas savages, and they better understand that this is not going to go well for them. So I encourage anyone from Hamas watching your show, which I don't know how big that sample is, Sean, but
the data is a little light on that.
It is. It's kind of hard. They once they turned in all their beepers, it's hard to get a hold of them. So the Israeli government is poised to do anything they need to get their people back. And the United States government, that was my primary question, is to the speaker was, what can we do? What are we not doing to help facilitate getting your people home? And what are we not doing to make sure that this doesn't happen again with Hamas or Hezbollah?
And what was the answer?
You know what they said? Right now, with the amount of support that we're giving them in this particular realm, they're exceptionally pleased with it. We just got and they brought this up intentionally. So they just got a delivery of B-82s. Those are 2,000-pound bombs that the Biden DOD had been holding up because you have a bunch of anti-Semites in the Democrat Party in the Biden administration, and they were explicitly thankful for that. Something else the speaker said, Sean, was that they're not asking us to fight their war. They're asking us to facilitate them being able to fight the war, which was great. And they're so incredibly appreciative. And what I explained to them, and they know this intuitively, the Israelis are actually fighting an American war, because every one of these terrorists that they're killing, Sean, if they weren't focusing on killing Israelis, they'd be focusing on killing Americans and our other allies. So let's never forget that.
So put your Navy SEAL hat back on.
Yep.
If they came to you and said, hey, Congressman, you know, look, you've done some pretty amazing stuff in the past as a Navy SEAL. You guys are trained for this stuff. What are our options? Like, what could and should we be doing to get these hostages out? What would you tell them?
I would tell them to essentially do anything they need to. And I mean anything. Listen, before October 7th, there was a ceasefire in Israel. There was a de facto two-state solution, and Hamas decided to break that. And we went over some of the events of October 7th again, and it's just horrific, and horrific. I hope people understand that. So whatever they need to leverage, they need to leverage. And I would never discuss any ongoing, I know you're not asking me to, but I wouldn't discuss any planning, if there's any planning going on in particular to recover these hostages.
Are they sharing that with you? I mean, I get you don't want to talk about it publicly, but in private, are they discussing with you some of the options that they have on the table?
We've had some very, very frank conversations.
And do you feel like, do you look at the options that they're presenting you with the background that you have as a Navy SEAL and say, those make sense?
Everything I've heard from the Israeli government has made sense in reference to their hostages. They're very, very skilled operators, and their tier one forces here are tier one forces.
Yeah. The president a couple of weeks ago or I don't know, gosh, it's probably only a week ago. It's Trump time. I forget. When Prime Minister Netanyahu was in the United States, made this point about potentially rebuilding Gaza, the U.S. having an ownership stake in it. How's it going over there in Israel?
Here's how it's going. The Israeli governmental officials that I've spoken to, it's like they just had this huge breath of fresh air. Like they've been held underwater for 4 years by the Biden administration. And it's palatable. They're incredibly excited that President Trump is in. They're excited about Pete Hegseth. They're excited about Mike Waltz being in as National Security Advisor. So they understand something has changed. And what's really important to know is that our enemies have no idea what in the hell President Trump is going to do.
That's the thing. That's, you just put your finger on it. Like, they're so, like, what, he's so unpredictable. That's what strikes fear in them.
And that's what, hey, listen, a direct threat to Vladimir Putin is what kept him out of Ukraine when President Trump was in office. He said that he would bomb the Kremlin, and Putin did not invade Ukraine. He waited for Biden to get in there. So what Hezbollah, Hamas, ISIS, Al-Shabaab, the Houthi rebels, the mullahs that are oppressing the Iranian people need to understand is that Donald Trump means business, and it's America's business, and it's our allies' business. So they're either going to conform or they will pay a heavy price. That could be anything from economic sanctions to those B-82s dropping down their chimney. It's time to get back to a place where American citizens and our allies are not being hunted and killed by savages.
Do you think that Hamas is serious? Like, are they playing games with the rest of the hostages? Or is there a real path to retrieve them?
I think Hamas is understanding that they're running out of human shields. And they're going to get more and more desperate as this process plays out. I don't trust them at all.
Right.
I do not trust anybody who intentionally planned an attack to slaughter, rape, murder, dismember, and burn alive thousands of innocent civilians. So they fall into the untrustworthy category. But what they're starting to see is that as more and more hostages are released, that's going to open up more and more options for the Israeli army to take care of those people.
Meaning that as they control fewer of them, it's easier to attack them. Is that what you mean? Like, in other words, the less leverage, the less hostages they have, the more leverage Israel has?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
So, and I agree with you on that. But doesn't that make it, I mean, they're not dummies either, I assume. And they know that the more hostages they give up, the more, the less leverage they have. So, I mean, does that play against Israel, right? If I know that, you know that, they got to know that. Do they say, if the more times that we hand over another hostage, the less you take us seriously?
It's not that the less they take them seriously. Listen, it is a blessing in the Jewish religion to free prisoners. It's part of their faith. Okay. So I have the utmost confidence that the Israeli government is going to fight equally and as hard for one hostage as they would for 100. But that just by volume, you can, if you only have 5 people, they can only be in 5 separate locations if they're being held separately, or they can only be in one location if they're held together, right? So the maximum amount of places you can put 5 hostages is 5 individual areas. That means that you essentially have 5 safe havens. So because you're not going to bomb a hostage on purpose, right? So as that number decreases, it's a math problem. The fewer amount of places a hostage can physically be located to, in essence, be a shield for these terrorists.
I want to turn to the comments that J.D. Vance made last week in Munich and the meltdown of the left and the Europeans. Some people called the speech belligerent on the left. Some people said that that's not how you treat allies. Chuck Todd put himself into the fetal position and probably went to the bathroom on himself. It just, they could not believe that we were speaking to our ally in Europe the way that JD did. How did you interpret the speech?
It was Churchillian. That's going to go down as one of the most significant historical speeches of the 21st century. Because for the first time in a very, very long time, the world's superpower spoke directly to their allies and just told them the truth.
Yeah.
And they needed to hear it. The left is apoplectic, which generally speaking means you've done something good. Anytime you can force Chuck Todd to release his bowels, you've probably done something right. That's a maxim. So if you think about it, man, the values So we had over 200,000 Americans, military people die in World War II to free Europe from Nazi Germany and free Asia from Imperial Japan. And what they were fighting for is to restore democracy. And democracy takes it takes the ability to exchange ideas freely. It's Benjamin Franklin's Silence Do-Goods letter number 8 articulates this perfectly, that without freedom of speech, you can't have public liberty, and without public liberty, you'll never have wisdom, essentially. And so because wisdom comes from truth over time, and it's got to be truth over time, not a lie over time. And so collectively, you can never move forward as a society unless you're able to freely exchange ideas without worrying about being persecuted. And that's what we fought for, to free Europe. And that's what the vice president was telling these world leaders, that they've gotten so far off the mark, they don't even realize how far off the mark they are. And for that reporter lady from NBC or ABC, where is she from, who said that?
CBS.
From CBS? I mean, they're all the same, doesn't matter. To say that free speech led to the Holocaust, I brought that up. We talked about that today.
How did that go over in Israel? Did people hear Margaret Brennan? Like, did they ask you about that? Does that reverberate in Israel, or does that stop at the water's edge?
They were disgusted. Absolutely disgusted. So the Speaker of the Knesset today handed me a book and he said, "You should look at this. We're setting this office." And it's a book. It's about that thick, right? And it's a big book. And when you open the pages in tiny type, it just says Jew. And it says Jew 6 million times in that book. It doesn't say anything else. So there's one word for every Jew that was murdered in the Holocaust.
Oh, okay.
And it was, I mean, it smacked me on the side of the face. I'm like, oh my goodness, because this is tangible. So every time these morons in the mainstream media start calling people Nazis and they're Hitler, they're fascist, it degrades those 6 million people that are in that book. And it's wrong.
It's funny. She hasn't said a word about it, by the way, right? So we're now 48 hours out from that Face the Nation interview with Marco Rubio, where she lied about the Holocaust, and she hasn't said one thing.
Yeah. And, I'm not big on firing people, but a very firm, heartfelt public apology for degrading the sacrifice of the 6 million people that were killed in the Holocaust due to Nazism, to National Socialism, that would be a good start. But that
I said this. I said this yesterday. She didn't just come up with this out of nowhere. She prepared that question. She had thought about that question. So it wasn't like a spur of the moment utterance that you could say, I fumbled it. Like, I have experience in this. Right. And she literally, probably the day before, gamed out, how am I going to get Marco Rubio? Because that's what she does. And so that's what's inexcusable about this, is that it's one thing to fumble something and to say, wow, I misstated something. This was a premeditated attempt to use the Holocaust to advance a political agenda.
Correct. And it also was a fantastic example of why the Department of Education should no longer exist.
Oh, wow.
Think about it.
I know.
If you are so, and I don't like using these word stuff, if you're so stupid that you think that free speech led to the Holocaust, every single nickel you ever spent on education should be refunded to you. Because that is just absurd. Just the basic premise is absurd. So then you realize she is not that stupid. She isn't. So she used that, as you said, she used the slaughter of 6 million Jews and gypsies and homosexuals. And the other big group were Jehovah's Witnesses that were targeted by Nazis to be murdered. She used those corpses to try to make a political point because she hates Donald Trump.
Yep.
Okay, that is a mental illness.
Yeah, well, and the sad part is, because she's on the left, the American media gave her a pass. No one has said a word about it in the media, none of her colleagues, no one at the network leadership. I do want to move on, though, because there's, we could go on about how bad the media is and how bad Margaret Brennan is, but I only have, a few hours. The thing that I found fascinating also about JD Vance's comments, beyond the free speech, which I agree with, like these guys love to talk about democracy and lecture us, but then scuttle any real discussion that they find offensive, right? So, but there's also the piece of NATO and the military, which is, you mentioned World War II and us coming to their defense to ensure and preserve democracy in Europe. And since that time, they have made certain agreements with us, mainly NATO, to protect them. And the deal was, hey, we'll all have each other's backs, but we'll agree to spend 2% in our national defense. And it wasn't until Donald Trump came into office the first time where he said, this is insane. We are spending all this money as the United States for national defense. And then you guys are shirking your own national defense and spending money on whatever else you spend it on, roads and bridges and whatever else for your own people, because you know we'll have your back. And it's about time that you lived up to your commitments. I know some of the media find that offensive, but to me, this is what is sometimes called tough love with a family member or friend, which is, guys, you're taking advantage of us. This isn't fair.
Correct.
And I feel like it had to be said.
Yes, Sean, listen, I went over to Belgium and Luxembourg to honor our soldiers that fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And we had these very frank conversations with them, like in their parliaments. And I said, hey, look, man, I represent a very rural district in the state of Wisconsin. And by the way, it's the most beautiful place on the entire planet. Wisconsin's their congressional district, obviously.
I love being freezing.
Oh, it's fantastic. I hate the desert. You can keep it. So I said, look, my people back home, and I represent more people than the entire country of Luxembourg, by the way. I said, my people back home are having difficulty filling up a gas tank and a grocery cart on the same day. And they're asking me, why are we sending hundreds of millions of dollars to a country we'd never heard of until now, essentially? Everyone was saying chicken Kiev. Apparently it's chicken Kiev. I mean, who knew? And so we're not asking you to do something that you can't do. We're asking you to do something that you don't want to do. And also I said, look, man, could you imagine the security posture of Europe if everybody in NATO who agreed a decade ago did what they said they were going to do? They promised they were going to pay 2% GDP. If everyone had done that a decade ago, would Vladimir Putin have invaded Ukraine to begin with? And that's a very honest question.
It is, because part of this is, if they can't defend them, like, all we're saying is help yourself. You will be stronger. The world will be safer. And now this guy, I probably won't pronouncing his name wrong, but Rutte, R-U-T-T-E, he's the new head of the EU. He actually said that NATO should up it to 3%. I mean, it's like, I think they finally are realizing, hey, if we actually want to talk the game on protecting each other, maybe we should live up to our obligations and look at our own national defense budgets.
Yes. And you know what 10 of them got together, sat around that round table, had apparently a very luxurious dinner, and said, we're going to take a more active involvement in our own collective defense. I applaud that.
I do too.
But
you mentioned Ukraine.
Sean, Ronald Reagan, trust but verify.
Right.
So now these cats are like, hey, we're going to get together and we're going to participate in our collective defense more. We're now in the verify portion, because sitting around having a fancy dinner, you get heartburn and maybe a hangover if you have too much wine. You don't get Vladimir Putin's ass out of Ukraine. So right. We need to make sure that they follow through with that, and we should help them if they need. Like, one of the biggest concerns that some of our allies have is that they're not really sure how to spend their money, because they want to build up their own industrial bases inside their own country, like we have.
Correct.
I'm like, that's great. So let us help you build a factory. That's fine. But until the factory's built, the war is still being fought. So you're going to have to, dual hat here for a little bit. You want to build up the military industrial complex in France? Fantastic. I have a very strong one.
But why should we go into debt and run a deficit of $2 trillion while they invest in themselves? It's insane. And you brought up Ukraine. I know that there's all this whining about them not at the table. Look, Putin, you tell me what you think, but I look at this very simply. Putin respects and fears Donald Trump. he doesn't respect any of these other European leaders. And frankly, they haven't earned the right to sit at the big boys table when it comes to paying. And so I know that they all want to talk about that it's not fair that they're not sitting there when it comes to Ukraine and rebuilding, but they haven't earned the right yet. And I think at the end of the day, my goal is I'm less concerned with who's sitting at the table and the outcome. And right now, Donald Trump and his team and Putin and his team can actually resolve this situation and stop the killing.
Well, so Sean, I'm going to very, very strongly disagree with your previous statement.
Okay.
The Ukrainian folks have been fighting tooth and nail for their national survival. So they have earned the right to be just about anywhere they'd like to. However, we know the more people you have in a room, especially when you do have the interpersonal dynamics that you described, which I think are correct, the less likely you're going to have a productive outcome.
Fair. Okay. Fair. Yeah. And you're right. You're right.
You know what I'm talking about? So
no. And I don't mean to impugn the Ukrainians. What I was saying is these European leaders who all said that they had a right. I get, but the bottom line is that if Zelensky could have solved this problem with Putin, he would have. He needs Donald Trump. So Donald Trump's saying, hey, I got it. I will go talk to the guy for you, and I'll tell him we're going to end this war, and here's how. Ukraine has to be involved at the end of the day when it comes to a solution. I'm for that. But I guess my point is all these other prime ministers and whatever heads of state over in Europe who think somehow that they get a right to sit at the negotiating table. No.
Correct. Yes. The best way to start a negotiation is with two people. And then you come up with, kind of a framework, and then you get two more people, and so on, so on, and so on, until it actually gets through. I mean, what would the ratification process be? What would the process be for verifying things? All those details have to get worked out. But right now, you need to have a negotiating team like frickin' Mike Waltz going over there, and Marco Rubio, and Pete Hegseth, and these cats that are like, they're actual players.
Right.
And they know, the Russians know that Donald Trump will open up the gates of hell on them if they don't stop this. And to me, it's shocking. The left has become this party of warmongers, and they seem to be so angry that President Trump wants to just have people stop killing each other.
Right.
I mean, to me, that is a liberal value that we should embrace.
He was so proud of the fact that there wasn't any wars or incursions during his 4 years in office. I think that's all he wants. Congressman, I want to ask you one other question, because as I mentioned, you spent decades as a Navy SEAL. Yeah. There's all this discussion about, well, what's going to happen when Elon goes to the Department of Defense? How much waste is there from your perspective there?
Massive.
Yeah.
The fraud, waste, and abuse at the Department of Defense, I can't even visualize it. And here's what we want to get to. We want to increase the lethality of our troops and the readiness of our troops so that we can protect American citizens and our allies and our interests. That's all we want to do. At the Veterans Affairs Administration, Sean, I've identified billions of dollars of garbage in these programs that don't work, or they're just throwing money into a fireplace. And I'm so excited, dude, that Doug Collins is coming in, because we need to do the same thing. Because every single dollar that is fraudulently spent at the Department of Defense is not a dollar that can be applied to putting a warhead on a forehead, right? Then every dollar that is fraudulently spent at the Veterans Affairs Administration is a dollar that cannot go to educating a veteran, cannot go to a veteran's healthcare, cannot go to supporting our Gold Star families. And that's wrong. And the left is going to play it like this. Oh, look at these guys. They want to cut veterans benefits. I'm like, look, I get all my healthcare through the VA, and I love the VA. I think it's a fantastic institution. But the higher you get up, away from the people that treat me in La Crosse, Wisconsin, or Tomah, Wisconsin, the higher you get up, the thinner the areas. And you can sure tell, because they don't know what the hell they're talking about. And accountability needs to be brought back to the Veterans Affairs Committee, the Veterans Affairs Administration, and also the Department of Defense. Why do you think all of these people are griping so loud? Because there's been this gravy train pouring out of the Pentagon for decades now. And that does not help Americans' national security. It does not help our allies. It does not help the world in general remaining a peaceful place. And that's all we want. I'm sick and tired of war, dude. I spent my entire adult life essentially in combat or training for combat as a Navy SEAL. And I don't want to send America's sons and daughters to go fight a war that we get involved with because we can't deter it to begin with because we're buying $7,000 toilet seats. That math does not math for me, Sean.
No. And I am blown away by the number of people on the left and in the media that somehow are not offended by what Elon Musk and DOGE is uncovering. And frankly, I think that's funny. They all keep saying, well, when he gets to the Department of Defense, what are they going to say? And they're going to say exactly what Derrick Van Orden said, which is bring it on, because the less we're spending on our national defense and more waste, it's not what we want. I want to uncover waste. I want to get rid of inefficiencies. I think your words are exactly right. Congressman, I appreciate you taking the time from Israel to join us, to update us on everything that's happening. And I appreciate you representing us over there, not just the folks in freezing cold Wisconsin, but coming over and showing Israel what great people we are. You're an amazing ambassador on that front. Thank you.
You're sure welcome, Sean. God bless you and your families and all your listeners.
All right, guys, what a great conversation with Congressman Van Orden. A great week headed your way, including a conversation with former governor of Illinois, Rod Blagojevich. You remember, he was sentenced to jail. He was commuted. His sentence was by Donald Trump the first term, and he just pardoned him. An unbelievable story of redemption and a relationship with Donald Trump that extends back to his time on The Apprentice. So I'm going to talk with him later in the week. We've got a great panel coming your way, plus all the updates on the Trump administration. Thanks for tuning in to us. A great column today that I've written at SeanSpicer.com. It comes out on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Go to SeanSpicer.com. Sign up for the free newsletter. I always appreciate a VIP, by the way. So I'll see you then. Go to SeanSpicer.com. Sign up. We'll see you back here tomorrow on The Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.